Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is the Otherppl podcast, a weekly program featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi and I'm in Los Angeles. It is a special Sunday episode of this program. Thank you for being here. I hope you are doing okay wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. So today I'm going to be doing an election special, an episode all about election 2024, which is coming up in just a couple of days. Tuesday, November 5th is the big day, and there is a lot at stake. It's a big election. And I realize that every time there's a presidential election in particular, the politicians involved will almost certainly tell you that the stakes are very high and that it's the most important election in the history of elections. But with this one, in my lifetime anyway, and I also think within the broader context of American history, this is an unusually significant election in terms of the fate of the republic. It does not feel like hyperbole to me to say that. And I think that the stakes are so high and so dramatic that it's almost hard to admit it or talk about it too much, because if you get into the weeds with this stuff and you really start to obsess, it can be hard to carry on with your day-to-day responsibilities. So in conversations that I have with friends, I've been noticing this. In conversations that I have with myself even, I've been noticing this. It's almost unspeakably dramatic, this election. And I think that we should admit reality. We are here. It's happening. And as unspeakable as it may seem to be, it would be a good idea for me to talk about it with an author who has written about this stuff in her fiction and who grew up in Washington, D.C., and has an intimate understanding of the people who live and work there, and also has a lot of insight to offer in terms of how power works in this country and what the relationship is between money and power, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be in conversation today with A.M. Homes, who you may recall guested on this program in episode 793 a couple of years ago. We were talking about her novel, The Unfolding, which takes place in the aftermath of the 2008 election when Barack Obama defeated John McCain. That novel, with the benefit of hindsight, turned out to be pretty prescient in terms of its assessment of how the American right wing would react to America's first black president. There's just a ton of insight and wisdom, political wisdom, in that book. And it really struck me then, and it occurred to me now that A.M. Homes would be a great person with whom to speak as we sit here on the eve, or close to the eve, of the 2024 election. Before we get there, I just want to encourage everybody who is listening to vote in this election, to make your voice heard. If you don't know where to vote or how to vote, or you need information on voting, just go to iwillvote.com and you can get information on your registration status, on polling places, all of that stuff. And if you are somebody who has already voted, don't forget to tell your friends to vote. Get your family to vote. Drive your neighbor to the polls if your neighbor does not have transportation. There are ways to affect the outcome, even if you've already cast your ballot. So I'm not going to do too much in the way of further preamble. I feel like most of what I would say is covered in the conversation that you are about to hear. So let's just get to it. I am very pleased to welcome back onto this show A.M. Homes, author of the novel The Unfolding, and somebody to whom this election and this country, I think it is fair to say, mean quite a lot. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Here I am talking with A.M. Homes.
I didn't vote in that one, but I do think there is a word history in that word histrionic. And I do think that this is certainly the most consequential election of our lifetimes, and certainly the most consequential in the last probably 100 years. And I don't think that's histrionic. I think it's just being practical.
But not everybody sees that.
That's a problem. That could be actually one of the big problems, right? Because I think we live in a society that is slightly ahistorical. So people don't really like thinking about history, don't like looking back at history. And I think without history and without context and framing, one might not realize how truly delicate the situation is and how much is really at stake.
So we talked a while back about your novel, The Unfolding. And I remember in that conversation learning a bit about your youth and how you came of age in Washington, D.C., or it's like, its environs.
Yeah.
And that, I think, lends you a perspective on the place and the people who live and work there, and on just, I don't know, our government and its power structure.
Mm-hmm.
That most people don't necessarily have. And your book is also sort of eerily predictive when it comes to like how things have unfolded since Obama's election in 2008. I'm wondering, as we sit here now in 2024, if you are surprised by anything.
On the one hand, I'm not surprised by anything, but I am terrified by something, which is to say that, when Obama won, or as the guys in The Unfolding would put it, McCain lost, I think what happened is that it unleashed a barely latent racism and sexism in this country that has really continued to fully blossom since then. And we see that, with everything in terms of the rollback of Roe v. Wade, the difficulties that women's rights are having. And I think what's interesting, if you think about just even the notion of racism and sexism and what the antidote to that would be, you would say, well, the antidote could be Kamala Harris, right? Because she is not white and she is a woman. And you think that would really be helpful. It's fascinating in the sense that I think a lot of people are afraid of big change. And historically and literally, the US government, and this is a Washington, D.C. thing, doesn't change that much. When I was a kid growing up, when Nixon was president, D.C. became more of a kind of centrist place, which was really because people wanted to keep jobs. And they liked living there. They liked raising their kids there. So the rise of what I call the khaki class in Washington, which is really a centrist kind of almost apolitical situation, or bureaucratic bloat, as some people might call it, really happened. And you had think tanks and you had all these other lobbying groups and sort of the expansion of the things that surround a government. And what we have now, and one of Donald Trump's promises in the Project 2025 promise, is to do away with, and get away with getting rid of things like, for example, the Department of Education. We need the Department of Education. One of the ways that non-democratic societies control the population is also by controlling education and learning and not allowing access to education. So there are things like that that are really, really scary and worrisome. And traditionally, because of the size and scale of our government, the president isn't able to kind of make sharp turns of the ship, because the ship you can go a little left and a little right, but we've kind of been going down the middle for a long time. And I think what you're seeing with, the threat of Donald Trump is really the threat of a radical change in American political governmental structure.
Do you think that the warnings about his dictatorial ambitions are founded?
Yeah, I think that we should listen. I mean, you should just even listen to what the guy says and take him at his word. And importantly, we actually have some experience with this. We had a first Donald Trump administration. And the idea, there's two things I'll say. One is that the idea that a lot of military people and generals and people very high ranking in the US military, who are not traditionally thought of as the leftists of America, are saying this guy is dangerous. That is a huge, huge red flag. It is actually like a forest fire that people should be paying attention to. The other thing that I think is the second huge signal, and this applies a little bit to The Unfolding, is that if Dick Cheney, who I would say was previously the scariest guy in America, tells you to vote for Kamala Harris, you know that you are in serious, serious danger. And I look at Liz Cheney and Liz Cheney's behavior, exemplary behavior, during the January 6th, testimony and that whole period, and her coming out overtly for Kamala, campaigning with her, as almost like a moment from the end of the unfolding where you would see the character of the big guy's daughter, Megan, stepping into a new role and also stepping into a thing where it is more about country than, political power. And, it's really an important moment. But I think if Dick Cheney is telling you there's a problem, it's bigger than you even want to know.
That's terrifying.
I know, I'm sorry. But I really think it's true. I mean, the likelihood that people who serve, high-ranking people in the U.S. military who don't usually have public opinions about things, in fact, it's sort of antithetical to their job to have a public opinion, are telling you this man is dangerous. He is dangerous in the sense that he actually wants to use the U.S. military against citizens of the United States. That's not what our military's purpose is. And the complexity of what would it mean to not follow an order given by this man, or even what happened on January 6th. That was scary. I mean, that is the DC I grew up in, and that is the U.S. Capitol that I spent time in as a kid. And I can tell you the U.S. Capitol Police are more like crossing guards. They're there to let senators who are locked out of their offices into their offices. They're not there to, deal with armed people who have come at the command of their commander in chief, the man they believe is telling them what to do. And he's telling them to hang Mike Pence and get Nancy Pelosi. This is we already had the warning, and the idea that people would not take that warning seriously and think that there is room to do it again, and also not realizing how much damage has been done in terms of the Supreme Court, in terms of Roe v. Wade, in terms of the erosion of both rights and political and judicial process. This guy is teeing up a real change. I mean, there will not be a democratic America that is familiar to us after this. And that is what is at stake, said the futurist.
Well, I want to say 40 out of 44, I think I read 40 some odd people from Trump's cabinet or his closest circle of advisors have chosen not to endorse him. Obviously, Mike Pence, his own vice president,
Right.
is not endorsing him, nor is he running with him. And then you have, as you just said, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, and then you have John Kelly, his former chief of staff, both coming out and saying pretty explicitly that he's a threat to the republic.
Why would we not listen to them?
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
How is this election even close? This is crazy to me.
Okay, but that's the bigger question. And I still think that the issue is, I heard Trump speaking yesterday from Mar-a-Lago, and he actually, and again, we're risking our lives now talking about this, right? But saying the things he says make no sense. So he says, migrants are coming in on Boeing planes. They're being flown to the Midwest. So suddenly he's raising this idea that, hundreds of migrants are just getting on these airplanes and they're coming to the Midwest to basically take your house, take your family, take your car, eat your dog, right? He on an hourly basis makes up stuff and says it in this monotone, serious, deep man voice that you're like, I should be scared of that. He has no plans except for his own plan. So he has no plan that's actually can be put in place to help anybody in the American, anywhere in the country. It's all about Donald Trump and a power grab. So how can it be this close? I think it speaks to the fact that, and this is what I was beginning to talk about in the unfolding, in the very beginning of it, the extent to which the American political system and process has lost track of the American people and has lost track of what the American people want and need. And I would attribute that losing track to the influx of enormous amounts of money into the campaign process that grew exponentially from 2008 forward.
What, after Citizens United, or what was it?
Not even Citizens United, but just the rise of, in Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, but the rise of dark money and all money into the political system. So now it always becomes about how much money can a candidate raise completely affects the outcome of the race, which is terrifying because it's not about that. And that's not what it should be. You shouldn't be able to, essentially buy votes with ads and social media and also We have more. There's always been disinformation, right? Since Abe Lincoln, there was disinformation. But the difficulty in ascertaining what is true and what is false, the idea that a fact is not a fact, these are really scary concepts that Donald Trump is playing into. He plays into people's fear. And I think what's interesting that Kamala is doing right is she's saying, first off, I'm here to represent everyone. I'm not here just to be like, I'm a Democrat, I'm for this, I'm for that. I'm here to represent the American people. And I would say if we can have a chance to in any way calm down the incredible divides and fear of each other that has grown in this country, and also go back to sort of what are the fundamental ideas, which is that, it's fascinating because theoretically Republicans don't want to be involved in your life, but now it appears they actually want to control your body. So, it's complicated, and there's such mixed messaging on their end, especially. So it's scary. It's officially scary.
It feels like I've heard the word calcified thrown around. It's a calcified, polarized electorate. Not that nothing lasts forever, but we do seem to be in this
fossilized would be another.
Yeah, just this entrenched period of, it's like a 50-50 divide, which sort of blows my mind.
But see, Brad, I think that one of the difficulties in that divide and is also, not to be weird, but it's the algorithms, right? So it's the fact that you only get what you want to get. You only see what you want to see now. So whether it's you were watching Fox News, whatever you're looking at on your social media feeds, the pathological slice of what is delivered to you is thinner and thinner and narrower based upon what the algorithms know about you. So people now they're not interested in something outside of themselves. They're looking to see their own reflection. They're looking to see what they believe delivered back to them. And it really has contributed to this fracture, I would describe it, more than a calcification, but a fracture that people don't even acknowledge. Oh, I'm only seeing 1/18 millionth of what this story is. I'm only seeing the thing that I've already seen before. It's not expansive. It's not designed for one to be presented with a set of arguments or different opinions and think, oh, this is what I believe. This is not what I believe. It just says to you, you're in danger.
And I think cable television news is sort of the same way. If you're only watching Fox, or if you're only watching MSNBC, your worldviews are going to be disparate.
Yes. It just confirms what you want to know already, which is kind of pointless.
And I think, too, that there are demographic issues at play. I mean, this goes back to the roots of it that you were talking about and that you write about in The Unfolding, that people who I think support Trump are most fearful of or uncomfortable with, but it's a reality that is fast approaching where white people are not going to be the predominant voting bloc.
Yeah.
And so it feels like in a more multicultural electorate, that's unprecedented in American life. Like white people have always run the show in this country and have always predominated, they've been the majority of the electorate. And with that shift coming, I think that might be driving a lot of the Trumpian anxiety and, all of the attendant behaviors that go with it.
I mean, it's certainly what drove the behaviors of the men in my book, The Unfolding. But also interesting is we have literally seen this coming, and it has been documented of at what point will the electorate change to being, not predominantly white? At what point will the census change? So it's all been on the horizon, but I think it starts to become more terrifying to people. And also importantly, people who have lost jobs, people who feel that the American dream has failed them. So people who, used to be coal miners, who used to have work in Ohio, who used to work in certain places in certain fields, have not had the benefit of the information that we gather every campaign cycle that would say, okay, we could bring XYZ kind of job to Ohio. We could bring XYZ kind of job to West Virginia. I mean, this is the part where I should be running for office, but I would say we've done a really bad job that we go every 4 years, we do all this grassroots work, we have so much information on everybody, and yet we never say, I'm going to bring this industry to your part of the country. I'm going to bring this world to you. I'm going to improve your lives and your public schools. I'm going to give you daycare and a job. And it's not that hard to do. This is not literally, no pun intended on Elon Musk, this is not rocket science. This is looking at how many people in what area need work. What could they be trained to do? How do we do that? Why wouldn't we invest American dollars in that to make American money and to give, Americans an American education? I mean, these are all things that are great. And that is the idea of the American dream, I think, is part of what Trump supporters are after. They see Donald Trump, they believe him to be successful. Somehow they think if you declare bankruptcy 6 times or convicted of crimes, you somehow got away with something that makes you even all the more special, that you knew how to navigate and get out of that. They've had to get out of credit card debt. I mean, it's not dissimilar, but those people feel that whatever the dream was, we lost track of the notion that it was a dream, and it was believed to be an entitlement, the American entitlement, and they didn't get theirs. And that's a very real thing. And that's something that we as a country need to address. It is a failure on the larger scale, but it is not something that Donald Trump is going to fix.
We also live in such a tribal society. Like, I've had conversations in recent weeks where I get really exasperated, and I compare the American political experience to sports fandom.
Yes.
Where I feel like it's like, are we really this infantile where it's like, I cheer for the elephants and I cheer for the donkeys, and no matter what the elephants do, I'll always cheer for them. That's kind of what it feels like, because there's literally no bottom. There's nothing that Trump could say or do that is outside the realm of human decency and until 2016 American political norms that his followers, like he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Turns out he was right.
I know, and that's super scary. And the fact that he keeps pushing at that, I also feel like there's a way in which he's saying, I don't really want to be president. I'm just testing you and testing you and testing you to see if there's any edge to where this goes. And the other day, I think it was yesterday, he said something like, your kids go to school, and while they're at school, their gender is changed, and they come home another gender. And I thought, well, that's fascinating, because sometimes in our country with no gun control, our kids go to school and they don't come home at all. But I've never heard of a child who goes to school as a girl and comes home that day as a boy. There is this spin that he puts on things, and it is really dark, and it really does play into, and he has a unique ability to play into people's fears. I mean, he is all about fear, and he has this unique knack too. He was talking about how Harris is running a campaign of hate. I thought, that's so weird. That's not what I'm seeing, right? I would say, before Donald Trump and Dick Cheney, we thought Nixon was like Mr. Complicated. Donald Trump is a very dark figure who has, in my mind, no place in the political establishment. I mean, he shouldn't be allowed to run a business, much less a country.
He's a serial criminal. These are facts.
Yeah.
He's been convicted on 34 felony counts in New York. He's been indicted and is awaiting trial on multiple others in multiple other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
He's an adjudicated rapist, committer of sexual assault, tax cheat. We could go down the list.
Right.
This is the guy that the Republican Party has for 3 straight election cycles chosen as its standard bearer.
See, to me, that's also interesting and confusing, because I would say, where is the Republican Party? And have they no decency? Why is this the best they have to offer? Because although I may not agree with some of the ideas, that are fundamental to the Republican Party, I, in the past, could think, that they are not stupid. I'll take whatever, and they would give some thought to things. So what has happened that they are somehow owned and operated now by Donald Trump? What has he got on them, and why would they invest in this very, very dark horse and think that's where their future lies?
I feel like Donald Trump is under the sway of Vladimir Putin in some significant way. And I think that dark money, I think a lot of Republican politicians are just craven, and they want to keep their jobs and keep their power. And so they'll sort of line up behind whoever will help them do that. But I don't know it well enough, but I know that there has been much written about Trump's strange affection for dictators, Putin in particular, and his long relationship with Russia and Russian oligarchs.
I think he's in Putin's pocket. I think he owes Putin a lot of money. He owes Putin a lot of everything. And he is enamored with him. And there is, to me, no question whatsoever that, they are buddies, and Elon Musk also is wants the affection of Putin, and between the few of them, they'd like to divide the world into three: Kim Jong Un, Putin, and maybe a little piece for Trump. I also think it's interesting because I don't think Trump realizes really how dark and manipulative both Putin and Kim Jong Un are. I think that Trump isn't as smart as they are. Not to be, we're gonna have to erase this tape as soon as we finish it. Otherwise, I'm going to be on some bad list. I'll be like on the do not fly list on next Thursday. But I think that that's real, and I think it's interesting to think about how gullible people are, and also why does the Republican Party have no backbone? And not to say Democrats are so great, but there, and I feel this with Mitch McConnell, it's power now at any cost. And the cost is actually officially too great now. You're going to lose your country. You're going to lose your democracy. Is that worth it? There's nothing left for you as a senator if you lose your democracy. There's no checks and balances. There's nothing to do.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell is sort of the perfect, emblematic case study for the craven Republican politician who knows better, but who, out of some twisted sense of self-interest or some kind of crazy rationalization has permitted this to proceed. When, of all people, Mitch McConnell had the power during Trump's impeachment trials, especially the second one, to put an end to Trump's political career. Had they convicted him in that impeachment trial, he would not have legally been allowed to run.
Right. And so why didn't he? And why is it that, old school Republicans like Mitt Romney and all these other people, Paul Ryan, John Boehner, they leave. They're like, I can't hack it. It's getting too weird and too dark for me. And then you have the rise of these, people that, again, in the unfolding, they talk about these, far right people that are really not only just extremists that have no history and no context. So they don't even know what they are representing or not representing because they don't know anything about how this country evolves. So, until the last election, the assumption was if you lost the election, you would leave the office, right? You would just quietly behave and pack up. But all of the behaviors that we didn't think we had to legislate because we assumed that people would behave appropriately are not working anymore. They're not operational. And so that is also and that's another red flag. The sense of what the expectations are for political figures, for elected officials, all of these things, and the threat to people who count votes, the idea that their lives would be threatened. It's or to librarians for letting people check out books. It's like, these are huge red flags. Things like voting and libraries are pretty basic in the American culture. And they were always sort of in a way, the most non-threatening things. If you wanted to lie to your mom about where you were going at night, you'd say, I'm going to the library, because no one would debate that. They would be like, no, you're going out to get stoned. No, Mom, I'm going to the library. That's a safe place, right? Somebody who works at the polls, those to me were they were like nuns or saints, people who will show up to work just because they believe in the system, they believe in voting, they believe in fairness and democracy. And all of a sudden they're scared to go to work. What does that mean?
It's crazy. I can recall, in previous elections in my lifetime, poll workers almost seem like church volunteers.
Totally. They're absolutely church volunteers. They're checking you in. They're giving you a place to sit. They're giving you a cup of coffee and a piece of paper, But that's really scary because those are the most basic, simple places. And when you look at the history of how do you disrupt, and this is literal, there's a CIA manual from the 1960s that talks about how do you disrupt a society. And one of the first things is sort of small things. You don't start with big things. You start with quality of life issues. You start with things like librarians and books and, voting and making people afraid to do those things or afraid to exercise very simple, basic rights. And you make people uncomfortable. And then the more uncomfortable people become, the more tribal they become and protective.
So we're pretty much on the eve of the election. It's fast approaching. And I feel like most everybody has either voted already or has made their decision about, whom they're going to vote for. And I'm just curious to get your take on the state of things as we get to a verdict?
Right. Well, it's the getting to a verdict is going to be interesting. My hope is, and I wish that we were a country actually that was more like Australia, that where are required to vote. I just think, and that too, interestingly, is antithetical to the way this country was founded, which was, of course, white men who owned land were the voters. And we still have a lot of systems in place that do make it difficult for people to vote. So my first wish is that everybody was required to vote. And failing that, I would say everyone who is allowed to vote and able to vote needs to vote, because every vote does count. Even in a state that's, heavily one color or the other, every single vote counts. And it's really important. And my hope is that people who maybe don't like Trump so much or just are over the whole thing will stay home and not vote on that side, but that other people who feel like, you know what, I care that if my child or my mother needs an abortion or needs care after a miscarriage, that they don't die. I mean, that's really one of the things that's on the table. I care about public education. I care about my neighbor. I mean, the most core values. I hope that people turn up and decide, okay, so this time I may have to put country over party, and I may just vote to maintain this country and let's get on some better footing. But we don't really know. I mean, it's heartening that people have shown up for early voting. It's disturbing that people are, firebombing ballot boxes. It's, we're in for a wild ride. There's no doubt about it the next week.
You don't think we're going to know on election night who the winner is?
I think the only way we will know is really if people fully turn out, and if there is an absolute landslide and people are just saying, we will not have this, we have had enough, and we want our country back. We want America as was described in the American dream, and with a promise and with care for every person who is here. And whether they're legal or illegal, we want care. We want attention paid. We want fairness and justice. And that's pretty basic.
So do you think it's possible that we'll get that landslide?
Until next week, I feel like it's one of the jobs is to remain hopeful and forward leaning, and hoping that it's, there's that great Christmas carol where the line is westward leaning, still proceeding, guide us towards light, whatever light, right? I mean, I feel like people are out there getting out the vote. People are driving people to the polls. People are very determined to be heard. The fact that 75,000 people turned up last night on the Washington Mall at very short notice to listen to what Kamala Harris had to say, I think is a good sign. But I also don't put any pranks past anybody. And I think that, it is a dangerous time, like literally dangerous.
Yeah. The only thing I can say with certainty is that if Trump, it looks like, is not going to win, he's going to claim victory, or he's going to claim that it was rigged. He will not accept any result where he is not the winner. It's only a fair election if he wins. I feel like he's going to stick to that script.
Well, yes, because he actually hasn't ceded to the last election. I mean, and what's complicated about that is we know that there are, people in place to help him, litigate that, and to, and to help him find votes and all those things that he's done in the past. So I think in that sense, short of an absolute landslide, he absolutely is going to do that. And I think that everybody who is on the side of just fairness and appropriate behavior, people are on alert that they're going to have to pay attention. And law enforcement is on alert. And, again, are people in the military and law enforcement able to do their jobs absent political points of view? I hope so.
And what is your take on Kamala and the Democrats? She obviously has had to run her campaign in a kind of sprint because of the unorthodox way in which she became the nominee, with Biden dropping out.
Right.
And I feel like the politics of the left are complicated in their own ways. I know that there's a lot of emotion and division around the issue of what's happening in the Middle East and
Yes.
Gaza. That's a really heated point of pressure, I think, that I feel when I'm online anyway, and when I see
absolutely.
rallies and whatnot. But I'm just curious to know what your take is on her, how she's managed her campaign, like her strengths and weaknesses as a candidate.
I mean, I will say first off, I'm super proud of Joe Biden because I think the decision to pull out of a presidential election is a really big, really difficult thing. And, there isn't a person who's been president or run for president who doesn't have a huge ego. It's one of the requirements for the job. You must think incredibly well of yourself to think that you can run this country. So the fact that he, in a fairly timely fashion, stood down is huge. And I do think he is, an incredible president, statesman, underrated, undercredited, and so on. But I also think, his time, he did a good job and now needs to be, retired and enjoying life. In terms of Kamala, I think she's really stepped up and stepped into it, and I think it's interesting because, you know, historically the vice president is not somebody who's supposed to have a point of view. That's not the job. The job is to toe the line, to go along, to do whatever you're asked to do, and to not do much. Right? That is the role of the vice president in this country. And so, on the one hand, she did not have a full voice until she became the nominee. And I think she's actually done a pretty beautiful job of talking to people. I think it's been impressive also to see her really try to engage younger voters and even people who are going to be voters about the importance of being, politically active and so on. And that she really is trying to unify people and pull things together, because I think it is a difficult time. And for lots of different reasons, people feel uncomfortable with her. She's a woman of color, but they also feel very uncomfortable with what's been happening in this country. And so the question is, can people get over the idea of a woman and a woman of color enough to vote for that person? And, we have the situation which happened with Hillary Clinton of having won the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. And so I think that that's also, a real reminder. But I also think we are in a different time now. And maybe now we're finally ready.
I think it's notable, too, that Kamala has been very careful and I think shrewd in terms of how she has managed messaging in her campaign and how she has not centered gender or race or any like the glass ceiling stuff. Like you never hear her talk about that.
No. And the good news is, I would say, like, in the best of ways, she doesn't need to. Why? I mean, it's like, there's so much else at stake right now. Let's just take all that's, for me, I look at it, I think all that's off the table. And I hope that that's true for other people. I think that more, concerning than is she a woman or a woman of color or the glass ceiling is how dangerous is Donald Trump? And, would I rather have somebody steering the boat who's just going to be kind of steady and keep us going forward and maybe bring us together a bit? And also, really importantly, that doesn't get talked about. I mean, we talk about the Middle East, but we had no status in the rest of the world, no standing. Donald Trump was not recognized, valued, thought highly of. He is not a diplomat in any sense of the word. So, what we see also economically, socially, on every platform is we are increasingly, not just the United States, the world, we are a global society. We are a global economy. And Donald Trump does nothing to help that. And I think it's kind of, coin my phrase, bullshit, that all these like billionaires and economists are like, Donald Trump is better for the economy. I think Donald Trump is terrible for the economy because the amount of unrest and dissension and destruction, maybe it's good for 4 people, but 4 people is not the economy. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and 2 others are not the world economy, although they want us to believe that, but they're not.
I feel like Republicans in modern history, like on the merits, like when you actually crunch the numbers and look at the facts, they are not effective stewards of the economy compared to Democrats. Like I think, what was the Bill Clinton line at the convention where he was citing how, of 51 million, I don't know how much veracity there is to this. I'm sure there's some wiggle room, but the overwhelming majority of jobs created in modern American history have been created under Democratic presidents. You think of the crash under George H.W. Bush. You think obviously of the Lehman Brothers crash at the end of George W.'s presidency. You think of the huge recession that we underwent due to mismanagement of the pandemic under Trump. It's like this is it's a trend officially.
Right. But it's also because American workers, American people, American society, there are a lot of us, and we all are able or, want to contribute and make this society and culture and economy work. And the Republican model is not one that is inclusive, right? And the Democratic model is always like, what are our social programs? But social programs are also economic programs. And they are, I think that the sense too of like, who are we in the larger world? Who are we with our allies? Trump doesn't want us to have allies. He only has one ally, two. He's got a fan letter and he's got Putin. I mean,
I feel like Kamala, like maybe the most essential redeeming quality about her for me is that she just seems like a normal human being that I could actually imagine myself hanging
yes.
out with. And I can't say that. I mean, I certainly can't say that about Trump, but I can't say that about most politicians. Like she seems very normal to me. And I think like when I watch her interact with voters and maybe especially young people,
Mhm.
she does exude like a really authentic warmth,
Right.
and she knows how to like hang. And I like that she likes to cook. I don't know, just like normal shit that like you'll never get from Trump. Trump is so unusual. Like
Right.
he's such a gold toilets. It's
Right.
like it can't
But
get any weirder.
I think you really actually hit something on a very, big nail, big thing, which is that Kamala is a real person, and she does present and seems, for all intents and purposes, to be very normal. And I almost think that's what you're voting for. You're voting for, I want normal America. I want an America that is recognizable to me. I want an America where people can talk to each other. And importantly, she seems to also not jump to forming opinions, but she asks questions. She's somebody who seems to feel both confident being in charge, and I feel comfortable with her being in charge. I'm like, you could be my medical proxy. You ask the doctor what's going to happen to me. You ask my accountant why I have to pay this much tax. You ask my kid's school why, my kid failed the test. She seems in those ways to be super capable. And Donald Trump does not, there's nothing about him that shows any capability of anything beyond blowing his own horn all day long and again looking at pictures of himself. So I think, yes, a vote for Kamala is a vote for normal and real. And also importantly, the idea that I don't want to have to be staring at my TV, at my government, at my newspaper 24 hours a day to make sure that things are okay, right? I want to be able to go to bed at night and think, wake her up. I do not want to wake him up, you know, with
Yeah.
an emergency.
Yeah.
Forget that. Do not wake him up. There is no football from him. There's no red phone. Just no, you know?
That's definitely one of the defining like traits of Trump's term in office was me getting up at all hours of the night and grabbing my phone to see what the fuck he said or did.
24/7. Yes.
It's exhausting.
Right. But I also think that is a contributing factor in the sense that, newspapers, all of these things used to publish once, sometimes twice a day. The news cycle is beyond 24 hours. It's like 24-second, right? So everything now is delivered, processed, spit back so fast that it also, the whim, the mood, the whatever happened in a given day moves things too much. I think the needle is like, it's like a Geiger counter. It's too active. So I think that's also a real issue. And it would be nice, I think, of, how do you calm? It's like we need like, calamine lotion for a country. How do you calm this country down?
That's a great question because I thought I thought Biden would have that kind of effect, and I guess maybe it feels like to make sort of a apt comparison, considering it's like Halloween time. It feels like we're trapped in some sort of horror movie,
Yeah. But
and it's
I think Biden calmed it down in practice, but not publicly. I don't think he has the charismatic personality that we look to in an elected official. He's very like low key. He speaks, you can barely understand what he's saying. He certainly surrounded himself with smart people. He, dug us out of a lot of difficult situations for the most part. On an international level, things have been pretty, not in the Middle East, but, in other places with our allies have been in pretty good shape. But I think Kamala actually has a commanding presence. And she also has a in the best of ways too, are reassuring. Let's have a mom for president. I mean, that we all need, everyone wants a wife. Let's have a mom and a wife for president. And then we'll know that things will be in good hands. Every other country around the world has been able to do this already. And, we're a little bit backward in that way.
Do you have a sense of things? I'm going to ask you if you have a prediction. Do you have a sense of where it's going to go on Tuesday?
Brad, I just would say she has to win. I mean, it cannot even be up for grabs. She has to win, because if she doesn't win, not only do I not know what the next 4 years are going to look like, I think, historically, even if we don't necessarily like a president or whatever, whether it's Reagan or, Gerald Ford or whatever, most Americans' day-to-day lives don't change that much. But I believe that if Donald Trump becomes president, the average American's day-to-day life will get worse, appreciably worse, and scarier, and that the tolerance for violence and civil violence and violence in this country will go up. Women's rights will continue to be rolled back, and there will be no Department of Education. So public education will, it'll become, again, a bigger divide between who has money, who can afford an education, and who can't. And it's not going to be good. And the thing is, will Donald Trump's supporters feel that shift in their daily life? They might not, because they already have so little. And that's a problem. But Donald Trump is not the solution to the fact that they have so little.
Yeah, I mean,
vote homes. I'll bring jobs to I'll bring printing and publishing. No, I think that we as a country owe each other and owe the lower middle class some opportunity. We really do. And whether it's money to buy a home, whether it's making the schools better, whether it's bringing jobs, we owe that. That is, it's not an entitlement and it's not a gift of a dream, but we owe people a chance to work.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking, sort of dreaming of Kamala wins and thinking to myself, like, okay, let's say things turn out in that way and she's the next president. And let's say on top of that, Democrats win both houses of Congress and she's able to actually govern. Let's just say that scenario unfolds. What would be a legislative agenda that she could enact that would appreciably improve the lives of lower and like working class people,
right,
and more importantly, would shift the dynamic at play in this country, this calcified, polarized, tribalized dynamic, so that people who are working class who feel like the Democratic Party has overlooked them or is too focused on cultural issues and doesn't care about the fact that they can't afford college or even rent. You know what I'm saying? These sort of like kitchen table issues or whatever they call them.
Right.
Like, I want to say I read somewhere that Kamala's first priority legislatively, should she win and have Congress, would be voting rights.
Right.
I think that's interesting because voting rights encompasses a lot. But I also think, meaning that it also, I think, encompasses like gerrymandering and campaign finance law.
Yes, right.
But I think that other things that I could kind of dream about that might move the needle would be like paid family leave.
Yeah.
And like expanding Medicare to include home care for seniors.
Yes.
Like if you pass those kinds of bills and then you do a good job of letting people know that you did it, I have to believe people would go, oh, this woman actually cares about me. This party actually is trying to make my life a little bit easier.
Right. But I think it's childcare, it's health care. It's making sure that, we do have this generation where we have a lot of very old people and people have young kids that they're taking care of. So yes, home care for seniors. And by the way, all of those things also create jobs, right? So, there's a way to do these things where you're both creating jobs and bringing people opportunity. A lot, making it possible for people to own a home is a huge thing for people. It's a sense of stability. It's a sense of promise. It's an investment. So I think investing in the lower middle class is a wonderful idea. And I think, to me, those are the big things. And then also, making sure people have food, heat, transportation. I could be like big infrastructure and say, I also think we need more trains. We need more public transportation in this country. We're so dependent on everyone having a car and whether it's a home care worker or whatever, you have to be able to afford a car and insurance to get to your job, right? You know, there are so many ways that we could create jobs and have our country run more efficiently and more respectfully of each other, I think would be pretty important.
What do you make of the gender divide among voters? I mean, it's not like even Steven or anything, but there is a discernible, when you look at the polling, there's a discernible divide between men and women.
Yeah.
The way, and I think especially like white men,
Yeah.
I want to say Trump wins white men ages 18 to 29 by a
Yeah.
pretty considerable margin. And there's been a lot of chatter in the political news that I've been reading about why like young men and men in general gravitate to him versus her. Like, is it just ingrained misogyny? Are the Democrats overlooking men and boys in a way that could improve?
I mean, I would say, I think because there's so many things that seem more front of mind, like women's health and so on. But I think the question about men and boys is, I think it's a very difficult time to be a young white man. It absolutely is. To feel that there is no place for you, to feel that your presence is a threat in some way, to feel that your position from where your father and grandfather was has shifted. You know, I think that there is a way in which Donald Trump says to them, I see you, and I see that you want to feel powerful and you want to feel, you know, in emboldened to act in certain ways. And I think in that sense, the question of, how do you grow up as a young American man and be someone who is thoughtful and has good values and doesn't rape people and doesn't, do bad things and doesn't, is not financially irresponsible and doesn't want a gold toilet, is a bigger question, and it's a very real question and something that we need to work at. I think just even acknowledging that there is a problem, and there is a problem because people feel displaced. And I think that's also what the fear about, people coming into this country is that they're going to be more displaced.
Yeah, so I think maybe some of the policy initiatives that Kamala is talking about with respect to entrepreneurs and what is it? You have like you can write off up to $50,000 in business expense if you're
Right.
trying to start your own business. The
Sure.
$25,000 down payment
Right.
credit for your house, like these
Right.
kinds of things might speak to young male voters.
Right. Absolutely.
Uh, and then I don't want to part company with you without bringing up the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
because the Supreme Court like has a very distinct echo when I think about the unfolding and I think
Yeah.
about the powerful men in smoky rooms making big decisions, consequential decisions that nobody really sees. I guess the Supreme Court makes consequential decisions like sort of off camera, but we at least
Right.
know they're coming.
Yeah.
But this court to me is way out of hand. And I think too, like, I can't shout this guy's name loud enough, but Leonard Leo needs to
Exactly.
become a household name,
Yes.
because he has done, in my view, he's doing enormous damage to the fabric of this country. And he is trying to actualize an agenda that is at cross purposes with democracy.
But
Right.
Brad, that's exactly the whole point of the novel, The Unfolding, is that, this influx of Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, and that is the very definition of dark money coming into the political system and trying to make sure that these judges are put in place and that the court is functioning in the way that is truly antithetical to democracy. And so many people have no idea who Leonard Leo is. If you went to the grocery store and said, "Hey, do you know who Leonard Leo is?" People wouldn't even know what you were talking
That's
about.
the way he wants it. He never does interviews. He
No,
hides
but
he hides in the shadows with his $1 billion endowment that some, now dead Republican mega donor gave him, and he buys Supreme Court seats.
exactly. Right. But it needs to be made public. And, people need to be talking about that and recognizing it. And by the way, it shouldn't be allowed to happen. It shouldn't be allowed to work that way. And it is real in the sense that there are people with enormous amounts of money pulling the strings behind things all over the place. And I would say the Republicans are doing it much darker than the Democrats, and they are doing it without any kind of moral code. And that's also really dark and dangerous.
Yeah, it's like the standards that Trump and the Republicans are held to versus the standards
There
that,
are standards.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah,
basically
there's
he can say and do literally anything with impunity. And it's not just impunity from MAGA, supporters. It's impunity, it seems like, from our media, like because he is just so high volume.
because he has said, the funny thing is he says all of this. So he says, I can do anything and you will still cover me. I can do anything and it doesn't change anything. He has told us everything we need to know, and still people are like, well, what's he going to say next? What's he going to do next? There is no limit. And he has told us that there is no limit. And all of the military people and all of the people that worked from Trump has said, there is no limit. This guy is dangerous and scary. And people are like going, but is that true? Is it really? And you think, just listen to what people are telling you and listen to what he's telling you. And then think, is this what I want? Is this the world I live in? Do I want to be? I mean, that makes no sense.
He's done enormous damage.
He has, and just wait to see what would happen. I mean, if he is elected, can you imagine having said all that, having had all these people come out and say, this man is dangerous, and if he's still elected, can you imagine how emboldened he will be?
Yeah, he'll say, look, I told you what I was going to do.
Yeah, you voted for me.
And you voted
all
for
wanted me, and so I'm here. It is the scariest time in our lifetime. It's very, very dark and dangerous. And I think we are naive, and that is also an American trait, naivete. We are a very, in a way, naive society. We are very naive to think that this is not a danger.
Well, and, just to quickly circle back to the Supreme Court, I forget what's the name of the decision where they basically granted the president with kingly powers.
Yes, exactly.
Like people need to,
what it was called.
Yeah, in the Hobbes, I forget, no, Dobbs or something like that.
No.
But anyway,
hobnobs.
Yeah, in the way that Leonard Leo needs to be better known, I think that the truly radical nature and reckless nature of that decision, and I'm not speaking in a partisan way here, like as I understand it, because of that decision, any president could hire or could command the Navy SEALs to like take out a presidential opponent, a political opponent, or could order their attorney general to, put somebody on trial, to arrest somebody. And that would be considered an official act for which the president would have no legal ramification.
Right. The only thing, and I've talked to people in the military about this, and I say, like, what do you do with that? And they say, well, we are not required to do anything that's an illegal order. But once you have the power to give all kinds of orders and roll back all kinds of legislation, you can say, it's not an illegal order. It's my order. My Justice Department supports it.
I mean, I think that's what Trump would do. You think he's going to take? He's not going to take no for an answer. He's going to,
of course not.
He's going to pull every lever he can. And I feel like too, because of the experiences that he had in his first term, and this sort of seems like the precipice that we were on in 2020. He was just starting to figure out how to truly get radical and tear things down. Mm-hmm. And, the guardrails were starting to fall away. And I feel like he would take all of that experience and what he learned and what the people
multiply it.
And multiply it.
And by the way, there are fewer guardrails. He already did get rid of some of the guardrails. So,
well, we just talked about the Supreme Court just ripped down a huge one.
Right. And he has the Supreme Court that he wants. So it's, that's also done now too.
So if this election is close, I worry about this because I think the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court could put its thumb on the scale for him,
yes,
I think it will.
Yes. Well, I look back and I think about what happened with Gore, and I think it's so interesting that, that's also a terrible precedent. And the fact that Gore didn't kind of contest that more, which was on the one hand when we still had a semblance of decency. But yeah, I'm worried. That's why it has to be more than obvious who's won.
So everybody's got to get out to vote.
Everyone's got to get out to vote. And I just cannot imagine that 50% of the American people think that this man is sane.
Well, if we're going to be optimistic here, it should be noted that he's never won more than 47% of the popular vote in any election. And in 2016,
that's a lot. 47%. Let's say 47% of people think he's okay.
It's terrifying, but it's, he won in 2016, it was 46.8, I think, which
Still too high.
historically in terms of presidential elections, that's a low number.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's his ceiling. I guess we're going to find out. So optimistically speaking, hopefully Kamala can get 50, 51, 52, and he's stuck at 47, and we don't have to think about him
I'm
after
going to go
this.
with 54%. I need a real margin here.
If she gets 54% and he gets 47%, does the math there?
46 would be 46.
46, yeah, okay. This is a literary podcast.
Yes,
I don't
exactly.
know.
Totally. Yeah.
But I think like 54, he'd get 46. I don't know what that would do to third party. I guess third party would just be a blip, a non-entity. But that would be a significant landslide, I think, at that percentage, right? 7% would be.
Right. But I think let's make that happen. And by the way, if you're saying he got what percentage in before, what was his high?
I think it was, 47, I think is the peak.
So there's no way he's going to get that or more, because I don't think he has more supporters than he had before.
That's what I can't understand, is how could you go through January 6th, go through his entire presidency, look at what he's done and said in the aftermath of January 6th, watch his physical and mental deterioration, which is pretty clear,
right,
and think to yourself, yeah, this is going to actually grow the base. I cannot entertain that possibility.
Right.
But
right. So one would hope that some logic would prevail and that people would say, even if I'm not sure what's going to happen, if they're not sure, then just don't vote for him and don't vote at all. And if you're saying, I don't want that to happen, then show up and vote for her.
Well, it's a very nerve-wracking and stressful election. I think maybe from like a higher vantage point, I guess we can say we live in interesting times, like historically speaking. And it's interesting and fascinating to talk with you and to hear your perspectives on it and to try to give listeners maybe just like a wider view of things as we careen towards election day. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Brad, thank you for having me on during these strange, interesting times, during the closing moments of the 2024 presidential campaign. Wild.
All right, guys, go vote.
Please. Only once. Just vote once.
Okay, folks, there we have it. That was today's conversation with author A.M. Holmes about the 2024 election happening in less than 48 hours. Is that what it is? Tuesday, November 5th. Don't forget to vote. If you don't know how to vote or where to vote, go to iwillvote.com for information. If you want to read A.M. Holmes' novel, The Unfolding, I recommend it. And make your voice heard. I don't know what else to say. I hope that this conversation was useful to you, inspiring maybe, or just a place for commiseration, or all of the above. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. You can follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. And if you want to get an Otherppl t-shirt or join the book club, you can do that at the show's official website, otherppl.com. If you would like to support the work that I do on this program, join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, please give this show a rating and write a little review if that's a possibility wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Rate it, review it. It helps the show find new listeners. My latest book is a novel. It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. It is out there now in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook. So if you would like to read my novel, it's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. There will be an episode on Tuesday, which you can use to distract yourself from the inevitable stress of waiting for election returns to start to materialize. So I will be in conversation with an author on Tuesday. I'm not entirely certain who it's going to be just yet. I have not made that calculation, so it will be a surprise. Stay tuned.